Hello and welcome to Script Club. My name is Luke Foster and I get together with screenwriters from around the world for deep dive discussions of produced screenplays. Script Club is brought to you by CenterFrame, a club for filmmakers where you can build your network, develop your skills and get your projects made. You can find out more about CenterFrame by going to centerframe.club. But today we are here to talk about the screenplay for Inside Out 2, and I'm absolutely thrilled that the writers of the screenplay, Meg LeFauve and Dave Holstein, are with us. So Meg LeFauve is an American screenwriter and film producer, as well as co-writing the screenplay for Inside Out 2. She co-wrote the screenplay for the first Inside Out film, for which she was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. And she wrote the screenplay for The Good Dinosaur. She's also the co-host of the popular and brilliant screenwriting podcast, The Screenwriting Life. So welcome, Meg. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thanks for having me.
We're also joined by Dave Holstein. Dave Holstein is an American writer, producer, and showrunner, as well as co-writing the screenplay for Inside Out 2 with Meg. He created and wrote for the Showtime series Kidding, starring Jim Carrey, which was nominated for a Golden Globe. He's also been a writer and producer for shows like Weeds, The Brink, I'm Dying Up Here, and the final season of Raising Hope. So welcome, Dave. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having me.
We're also joined by one of our regular panelists, Lynsey Cullen. Lynsey's plays have been staged across the UK, including at Edinburgh Fringe, while she's also written 4 produced short films, including Biology, which has been screened at BAFTA and BIFA qualifying festivals worldwide. She also was recently selected for the BFI Midlands Feature Ideas Lab to develop her part animated debut feature, Happy on Paper. So welcome, Lynsey. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here.
We're also joined by our Script Club members. Nathan is unfortunately dealing with a family issue at the moment, so we wish him and his family well. But to let us know what you're saying in the chat and to ask your questions, I'm delighted that one of our other regular panelists, Diogo Brueggemann, is with us today. So Diogo is going to be letting us know about how you can all contribute.
Yeah, well, over here, well, thank you for having me again, Luke. I know that I'm not as good as Nathan because he's a pro at, choosing and picking the best comments and questions here, but I'll do my best. And yeah, there's a chat box on the right of the screen, so you can just go there, leave your question, and I'll bring them to the panel.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Diogo. And so we are broadcasting live on YouTube. If anyone encounters any issues or the stream gets kind of halted or any paused in any way, we are also streaming on the centerframe.club website, on the Script Club page, and we're on LinkedIn and on Instagram. So you will also be able to find us there. But before we look at some shots from the film, I really wanted to sort of start by asking about how the script came to be written. I mean, Meg, perhaps sort of starting with you. I mean, the first Inside Out film was obviously a huge success. So how long after the release of that film did the idea of doing a sequel come up, and how did you come to be involved? Were you involved with that from the very beginning?
At Pixar, they don't just do a sequel to do a sequel. They really wait for a sequel-worthy idea. So I don't know if they'd heard other ideas pitched to them internally from their storyboard artists and directors of what a sequel could be. But I know that when Kelsey Mann pitched this idea of anxiety taking over headquarters, a hijack in essence, that was something that felt sequel worthy to Pete Docter, the original creator of Inside Out, as well as now the head of Pixar. So they called me and asked me would I work with Kelsey, who I'd worked with on The Good Dinosaur. He was the head of story. And I really enjoy working with Kelsey. It's a really creative, he's so smart, and it was so fun that and of course, I wanted to go back to these characters. I wanted to go back to this world. So I said yes. And he had a very small pitch of what who anxiety could be, how she's taking over. And so we started from there. And then we just started a lot of iteration, a lot of talking to now what is actually the story. And we went through many, many, many versions. And I could go into that, but where would you like to go from here?
Well, I think I also wanted to ask Dave, how did you come to be involved with the project?
Well, I've been meeting at Pixar for various projects over the years. I was supposed to go write Onward for them, and then my TV series got greenlit, and I went and did that. And some years later, I got a call that Meg had to move on to another project, and I came in midway through the production of Inside Out 2 to sort of take over where Meg began.
Great, thank you. And I mean, Meg, just sort of going back to you, I mean, what were I mean, so you're saying you went through a lot of different iterations before perhaps settling on this story. I mean, what were the particular challenges of writing a sequel to what was a very both critically and commercially successful film?
It's what you would imagine times 100, which is they are beloved characters. A sequel has to match and then go beyond. So it has to match what people expect, and then it has to show them something new. It was very important to our producer, Jonas and Pete, that we're also going new places, discovering something new about Riley, about the emotions. And there was a lot of pressure. And I had done the first one, so I became I would be like something. I'd be like, well, no, who made up that rule? Because remember, this is a world with a lot of rules. And so I would be like frustrated by, oh man, we can't do that because of this rule. And then I'd be like, oh yeah, I did that. And I actually think that's why it's so genius that Dave came in, because my brain was kind of locked sometimes with the first one, and a fresh kind of intelligent genius take is sometimes what a movie needs. So a sequel has those pressures on it. It has to be better. It has to bring something new. It has to give us what we loved about the first one and not be beholden to the world rules because for expectation, but also not too beholden to them. So it's hard. Everybody's like sequels. And I'm like, you don't even know how hard a sequel is. You don't even know how hard it is.
Before we get into any individual scenes, I mean, Lynsey, was there any questions about the overall writing process that you wanted to ask Meg and Dave?
Oh, I'm sure, like everyone, I've got a million questions, but I mean, I'm really curious. I've never written with someone before, so I'm really curious about how, like, when you came on board, and particularly into a world that Meg's created, essentially, how did you decide who's writing what? Were you writing at the same time? You know, were you both writing versions of the same scenes, and like how did it work, you two together?
Well, I mean, to answer your question, it didn't. It was at that point, Meg was off the project, and it was just me. And so we never actually got to work at the same time on the movie.
We have in the past.
It's true. Meg and I have been friends for over 20 years at this point, and so we actually worked on a TV show years ago together. So we sort of knew each other and trusted each other, and it was a really wonderful sort of fortuitous handoff between the two of us because we sort of knew and respected each other. But no, it wasn't like you might be thinking that there were two people working on a movie at the same time and writing the same scenes. Most of the process is between the current writer and the story room, which is essentially at Pixar at least director, a head of story. There's usually an editor in there, and so that's sort of who's discussing what sort of iteration we're going to try next, and then the writer goes off and writes a scene and sends it in, and you just keep iterating and iterating and iterating is sort of the Pixar process, which is unique to them. I mean, we'll write and rewrite that movie 9 times at least. I personally wrote, I was counting it, and I gave up after about 800 pages. So I think there's I can't say that the way we do things up at Pixar is entirely the way every movie is written, but it certainly has its own ups and downs and pluses and minuses.
Great, thank you. So I think it'd be good to sort of show a few shots from the film, actually, just to sort of get us started looking at some individual scenes. So I'd like to really start by just looking at the way that the new emotions in the story are introduced. So let's, if we can, let's have a look at a few shots from the film.
Oh, you're the one Coach told us about, Riley. From Michigan, right?
It's Minnesota, sweetie.
No. We cannot correct Val Ortiz.
This is from early in the story, after we've been reintroduced to the emotions from the first film. Joy, anger, fear, disgust, and sadness. Riley is now 13 and is the star of her hockey team. With her friends, Bree and Grace, she's invited to a hockey camp run by the coach of the high school team. Here, she meets her idol, Valentina. This triggers the arrival of 4 new emotions at headquarters: anxiety, envy, embarrassment, and ennui. Each emotion is given a moment to establish their personality, and although Joy welcomes them, we get a sense there will be conflict between her and anxiety. So, I think, Meg, you were sort of saying there earlier that the idea always was from the beginning that anxiety would sort of stage a bit of a hijack of headquarters. Was it always the idea that there were going to be other emotions as well as anxiety? And, but also how did you decide which, emotions you were going to choose?
No, we always knew anxiety was going to hijack. Kelsey had experience with anxiety. I have experience with anxiety. It's something we grew up with, especially as kids. So we felt very tuned into that idea of being hijacked. But we didn't have new emotions. Originally, anxiety was named Tia. She was a worker coming in, and she was disguised as a mind worker who was there to help with puberty's arrival. And then she's uncovered almost like a mystery of, oh my gosh, this isn't a mind worker. This is anxiety. And she has this nefarious plan. And we did versions of that, and it just would run out of steam and didn't have as much fun as we wanted. It wasn't digging as deeply as we wanted. And then we had this idea of, well, what if she's coming? Because puberty does bring on all kinds of changes. So what if there's new emotions and we can really have fun with that? But here's the thing you have to understand. The head of the studio also did the first movie, and this is a world full of rules. So we have to prove and convince Pete Docter why there's new emotions. Where have they been? Why haven't they been driving? Why are they arriving now, etc.? So there's all kinds of sequences that were written and created to answer those questions. There was a emotions waiting room, which we went down into in the adventure and saw that they had like a shitty 1950s TV that was fuzzy and one giant button, and anxiety went over and showed with like a magnifying glass, like, look, we have been driving. There's a dot of anxiety, but we've been driving down there and we don't come up and kind of pull over. Or there's the question, when we jumped in the first movie into the parents' minds, why didn't we see these other emotions? They've gone through adolescence, and I was like, well, there's a curtain. They're behind the curtain because it's kind of true. These things arrive in adolescence and they're very big and then they kind of recede again. And Dad's is really dark back there. Like, you're having to really justify backwards and forwards both movies where these have been. Now, once you go through, as Dave said, iteration, those things start falling out because you don't actually need them. You needed them to get where we got. And I think that's a lot of things that emerging writers need to understand. When you're writing those early versions, you're setting down stones to get somewhere that you can't even imagine yet. And that you just have to go on that journey, even though most of those stones are coming up and not even going to be necessary. So that's really something that Pixar taught me. So we had to go through, we convinced Pete about the emotions that were in animation. So that has to do with drawing. So they were drawing pictures. Now, what emotions? We had many, many emotions to choose from. One of my favorite was Schadenfreude, who laughs when you get hurt. He didn't make the cut. We had pride, lust, greed, irritation, hope, infatuation, doubt, suspicion, guilt, which was a bit close. And then we had a whole other character in the movie for many, many iterations called shame. And it turned out that anxiety was actually working for shame because of in our research of all the emotions you have in your existence, the one bad emotion, and there aren't bad emotions except for one, which is shame, because that's self-loathing in essence. And there's a difference between shame and guilt. So all the research is coming in, but eventually, and we tried versions with a lot of emotions because that's what it feels like in adolescence. But it kind of came down to 5 and 5 and what emotions would really represent that feeling of adolescence the best, and kind of narrowed it down to those, and would serve Joy's story, which is the other thing you have to remember is this is Joy's story. Riley is the prize and we love her and we're attached to her, but the A storyline is Joy. So whatever emotions get chosen, yes, they're serving Riley, but they're really serving Joy's journey in the act 2.
I think in this process, what's important, just to quickly jump in, Luke, is that there's so much, there's so many places you can go and so many details and so much research that at the end of the day, it's often the writer's job to simplify and to find what is let's boil this all down. What is the emotional 3-sentence version of this movie? And to keep trying to find that North Star that makes every other question easier to answer.
I'm just going to bring up some of the script pages, actually, just in case anyone wants to have a look at I can. There we go. Yeah. So these are this sort of sequence we were just really looking at, where we're introducing new emotions, is really from about sort of page 41. And what I really, really liked particularly was just the way that each emotion is given a little moment to kind of shine and to reveal their personality. That we first meet anxiety, and then very similarly envy popping up, and envy gets a little moment, and then embarrassment also then just gets a little moment as well. Building up to what I think is my favorite reveal of Ennui, just sort of lying on the couch, just sort of using a phone instead of even bothering to go up to the console. And it's, this is really sort of nicely done. And it was also very nicely the way that it was put in a situation where there was enough conflict for where they would have something to do. It wasn't like Riley just having dinner around the table or something. There's been a bit of a sort of high stress situation of meeting Valentina and being at this camp for the first time. So Meg, I just wanted to ask, how did you come up with those tiny little, very economical moments of just giving every character just a little introduction where we really immediately got a sense of kind of who they were?
Well, honestly, because I had the first movie, and that's how we did it in the first movie, which, by the way, we did many versions to get to that introduction of the original 5. It's one of those moments where it's a sequel, so you can begin to echo if you want it and use that. Like, we're kind of used to that. Because if you remember in the first one, it's a voiceover of Joy, which was a whole other story of how we got to a voiceover. But like, she's like, meet fear, meet anger, meet so-and-so. So we're kind of trying to do that in a way because we know that's economic and it works, but they all need their own moment to shine. So we're doing it now with just anxiety, literally introducing them. The other trick, and this is for all of those writers out there, it has to be active. It's not just them standing there, envy. She's hitting the console, because the other thing that's happening to, as Dave said, to Joy's story, Joy feels overwhelmed. Joy feels this is an invasion. Chaos has erupted, because that's what adolescence feels like. So the scene is created to make Joy and the audience feel overwhelmed. Joy doesn't want anybody else touching the console. She doesn't want colors. She doesn't know what's going on. So that sense of chaos and things happening now that she can't control, we want the audience to feel that too, because they're sitting in Joy's shoes. So every character has an introduction, but it's also very active and it's moving very, very quickly. And it was fun to decide, what we're saying about them and how we, as Dave said, can define that emotion in one sentence. That doesn't, just for our emerging writers out there, that doesn't happen like in the moment in 20 minutes, you figure that out. It's many drafts. You write the long version to get down to the sentence. And that's always really important to remember when you're looking at completed film pages, I think. And then ennui is a fun story because everybody was like, nobody's going to know that word. What is that word, ennui? It's French. Like, why are you putting her in the movie? I'm like, because it's so, I was just arguing so hard for it is what it feels like to be a teenager, especially a teenage girl, that ennui eye roll. And just let's make it fun. Joy doesn't know what ennui is either. She doesn't know how to say it. She's the audience. If the audience doesn't know how to say that word, neither does Joy. So it's I guess my quickest answer to that is keep it active and keep things happening. And then also it's Joy's emotional point of view. All the stuff that's happening is because that's how Joy feels, that invasion, that I can't control this. And yet I'm supposed to be a host and I'm Joy. So I'm trying. And that calibration of Joy liking them, not liking them, man, every draft, it was calibrating a different direction. One of drafts, she was like, no. Another draft, she was like, yes, I love new emotions. And it just kept calibrating to really get what you just see in these pages.
Thank you. So, Lynsey, I wanted to ask you, what did you particularly like about this opening sequence where we meet the emotions for the first time? And did you have any questions for Meg about this?
Yeah, I love that it's so universal, this idea that you meet someone that, especially as that kind of age, as a teenage girl, that you meet that older teenage girl that you just idolize, But I had read somewhere that it was that you had different, I mean, I'm sure, I think some people are asking these in the questions as well, that there were different iterations beforehand, that maybe it wasn't going to be the hockey scene, that it was going to be what was it before? I read somewhere that it was going to be a talent show or something.
It's a
like
talent
that.
show, yes.
Was it still the general idea though that she would meet someone older, and that's where these kind of emotions come from?
The idea of the film is that these emotions are not arriving because of Valentina. They're arriving because of adolescence. They're coming as soon as that alarm goes off. That was always the idea. The puberty alarm goes off and all hell breaks loose. Like the workers come, they're destroying everything, because that's what it feels like. So these emotions have arrived because of puberty. Valentina is just a way to now express them and put them into a goal, problem, all of that wonderful stuff that we writers want to grab onto. But no, originally she was in a talent show, because there was a while where people were like, we already did hockey, let's not do hockey again. Riley's bigger and broader than that, let's try other things. So you're like, sure, you go to the first obvious thing. I'm just saying this to all the emerging writers. Yeah, your early drafts, you're going to grab like stuff that maybe seems obvious. Talent show, sure. And then of course, quickly you're like, no, we're not doing a talent show. Let's not do that. But you're realizing, no, the reason hockey works is because it is such a big part of Riley. And we want to go back, and it's so active, right? Talent show is standing and doing something. Hockey is actively moving. You're bumping into people. We need to get a place that there wasn't any phones, because we don't want to deal with phones at that data movie. So if you're at a hockey camp, like it just started to evolve, because we tried hockey, then it became a camp, because Kelsey's kids had been to a camp. That's also very part of these kind of stories working, is you're putting yourself in there and your experience and your kids' experiences. And Valentina arrived because as a female, it's a big, and not even just as a female, Kelsey even had not a crush, but kind of was in awe of a kid in his band. Kelsey had to play the flute, and this guy got to play the sax, and he was the cool guy, and you're the dork having to play the flute. And I was like, I totally get that. For me, it was ballet and blah, blah, blah. You always have these people that you're idolizing and wanting to be at this age. So she started to work her way in. And then you have to calibrate. Is she mean? Is she a mean girl? And we really didn't want her to be a mean girl. It would have been so easy just to put an archetypical mean girl in there. Yeah. But that doesn't also how it works and how it feels. And that's not every female relationship. Every female relationship isn't mean girl. It's actually, she's awesome. She's as awesome as she thinks she is. And it's not you, right? And you're going to do things to try to be what she wants you to be, and to accomplish things to be like her, that we do in adolescence, to find out who we are and what our values are and who we are. So Valentina came in and served as Riley's story, but also the emotion story, because it's what the goal of the movie, like what is the goal of the movie? The goal of the movie is survive what's coming, which is the school or whatever's coming, but really Valentina and this camp, right? So that's how that all started to develop and move into that. And you do start, I'm just going to say it again, you do start in your early drafts with other things, because you have to find it. You have to get to Act 3 to know this isn't exactly it. And Dave's right, thousands of pages. So you're going to write 15 drafts. This is why you're writing 15 drafts.
But also all those choices funnel, I think, very cleanly down to joy. Camp leads to Valentina. Valentina activates anxiety. Anxiety is there to replace joy. It's Joy's story. She's being replaced. And I think that's what gives you the structure and the premise of the movie, is your main character. What is their biggest problem, their biggest pain? It's that they're being replaced by anxiety. It's a takeover movie, and I think all that math eventually has to boil down to just who's your main character and what's their biggest issue and how do they solve it.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I ask as well, just to tag on to that, as someone who hasn't worked then with voice actors either, do you find that, I mean, you're introducing all these new characters. Did any of the writing or anything change once then you got the voice actors in and you kind of worked with them, or was it quite set before, were they kind of following the script as was really well, or did things change when you got them in?
I mean, Meg can speak to this too, but my favorite part is getting these actors in a room and improvising and throwing them new lines, and so much of their personalities, shine through and make these characters. I mean, obviously Amy, but Phyllis and Sadness, we had some great improvs. Like I really I really love getting in the room with these guys. Everyone in that cast is so talented and so funny and just specific, and I think as a writer, especially animation, where you really can record so many variations of a line that like it's kind of on you to open up and say, I've got a good joke. I want to hear it, but I also want to hear 11 different things we come up with together.
Yeah.
So I see there's been a lot of activity in the chat already. And I see also we've got people from Malaysia, Canada, Sweden. I saw New York, Barbados, and Bournemouth as well. I think I saw as well. So I'm going to ask. I was wondering if Diogo can come up and perhaps read out a couple of questions from people.
Yeah, well, we have, a lot of questions from all over. So, and some of them, the discussion has been so rich that a lot of them have been answered already. So one of them is related to animation itself. So it's from Jody. She asks, when writing an animation script, how much detail do you need to give and how much can you leave for others to flesh out? For example, Riley celebrates on ice is on the script. So how can you help us figuring out this one?
Well, you have to remember that you're working with storyboard artists almost immediately. So even in the very, very early stages, all we know is there's a hijack by anxiety, and your director is also an artist. So he's beginning to draw. And then you're bringing in one or two storyboard artists to talk about what does it feel like to be a teenage girl? Visually, what does that look like? So from the earliest stages, there's these granular things coming in of people executing. And those character designs are coming in, which are shifting kind of how you think about the character. When embarrassment came in as a huge guy, you were like, oh, right. So you're in an interactive experience from the beginning. And Dave can speak more to if it's like TV, but it's what I imagine it to be more. It's a giant room full of people. You are steering with the director and writing, but there's a lot of input coming in all the time. So you might write in the script, Riley celebrates on the ice, because you're handing that to a storyboard artist who is then going to draw it and what that looks like. What's important is if in that celebration, there's a character shift, there's a plot shift, there's something that I need that image to focus on, then of course you're going to write that in the script because you're tracking character and plot and all those things. So, but it's very, very collaborative right from the beginning.
And Diogo, was there a second question we could take a look at this stage?
Yes, there's a question from Nikita. The question is a little bit more about the comedy side of the script. She asks, how do you add humor gags to the story? Do you have a view of potential gags at the outset of a scene, or punch-up scenes that you feel need more humor or relief?
All of the above. I mean, I feel like we'll certainly try to make the first draft as funny as possible, but you have all these these elements at your disposal in terms of the actors and improvising, in terms of the story artists and visual gags and playing around with things, in terms of you're constantly iterating, you're constantly doing rewrites, and you're constantly trying to milk as much humor out of it as you can.
And, to the emerging writers out there in terms of humor, people have different approaches to humor. I'm very character-based and theme-based, and I'm like, what is this about? Who is this person? That's how I know how to make it funny, because of who they are. There's other writers that come in and like scattershot the funniest stuff, just like, boom, 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 right? So you be who you are, right? And if that's how you get to your humor, that's how you get to your humor. So both service a purpose in this kind of churn that you're in. And I so admire the people who can do the other kind of humor that I can't do. And I used to feel bad about it. And then I was like, well, that's just how I am. I still get there, but it takes a little longer and a little more story development for me to get there.
Great, thank you. And thank you so much, Diogo, for reading a couple of the questions out. We'll bring you back in a little bit to see what else people are asking in the chat.
Okay.
And I wanted to sort of move on a bit and just have a look at a few more shots from the film, really, and particularly have a look at a sequence that takes place in more towards the middle of the story. So let's have a look at that now, if we can.
Oh, my penalty almost lost us the game today. What if I get to camp and I screw it up?
Early in the film, Riley feels bad about getting a penalty that almost lost her team the game. But Joy uses a jerry-rigged tube to send the bad memory to the back of Riley's mind. She gets the other emotions to banish more embarrassing memories. Later in the story, they try to use the tube to get back to headquarters, which has been taken over by anxiety. But anxiety destroys the tube. At her lowest point, Joy finds herself surrounded by the discarded memories. No idea what to do.
Come on, please. What am I missing?
So this is actually more to do with Joy's character journey, really, as much as anything. So I think I particularly wanted to ask you, Meg. I mean, I think what was great about both the first Inside Out film and this film was the way that Joy always seems to be wanting to do the right thing, always wants to do, the right thing for Riley, and has really good intentions, but at the same time there's always something she doesn't quite seem to get. And in the first film, she didn't realize that you have to let sadness into her life, and in this film it seems to be that you can't just sort of banish bad memories and to the back of your mind, because bad memories and bad experiences really sort of help to define who we are. And I think they sort of worked really, really beautifully in this film. When you come into sort of looking at character arcs, I mean, generally, more in TV, characters seem to maybe change in maybe small steps or perhaps not at all across the series. Whereas feature films, they tend to be much more about just this one-time big life-altering change that happens to one person. And that does happen, obviously, in the first film with Joy. So when it came to this film, how did you come about, constructing and coming up with another character journey, another big life-changing change for Joy?
Well, it's all we talk about, because the poles of her character hold up the whole story. So, for me personally, I started with Joy was told in the first movie to not drive, that you have to allow other people to drive. And in this one, she's actually being asked to come forward, and that Riley needs you. And that really, Joy is becoming self-compassion for Riley, that she's growing too. So always her growth in those poles. And the back of the mind stuff came very early in terms of what is Joy's mistake that the audience can agree with? Because that's something very important to me, is that the audience has to be a little bit brainwashed to not see Joy's mistake ahead of her. So we've all put stuff in our back of the mind as parents and as humans, for ourselves, but also as parents. We're always like, don't worry about that, right? Just put that to the back of your mind, move on, right? That's not always great advice. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. In terms of, we always knew that this is Joy's mistake. So these are going to be the poles of her character. She's going to make this mistake before anxiety arrives. She's already making mistakes. It's not because of anxiety. She starts to make worse and worse mistakes, but it goes back to that sense of self. She wants Riley's sense of self to be a certain way, because it's her kid. And this is your drawing on all of your parenting mistakes. You want your kid to be happy, which is the first movie. And this one, you want your kid's sense of self to be all the wonderful things they are. Why are you thinking about the bad things? But that is part of your sense of self. That is part of who you are. And Joy doesn't accept that, because she thinks it's the best way to parent Riley, which we all make those mistakes. So we always knew that was going to be this to the back of the mind. What the back of the mind was changed a million times. It was a dark and scary closet. It was a lot of different things. It became just literally this pile. And I always love to push towards a moment in the plot where I don't know what's going to happen. And as soon as we talked about it, and I said, well, what if the tube falls down? What if, because of anxiety, it's gone? Everybody was like, well, what would happen? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what would happen. I don't know how they're going to get back. I don't know anything. But that would be the scariest thing for me as a parent, to push me to that realization of self-realization. And something I just want to say to the emerging writers out there, your end of Act 2, this pull for your character at the end of Act 2, where they come into consciousness of they've created the plot, it's about them. It's not about the situation. It's not about something that somebody else did to them. It's about them. And I think I should hand it off to Dave now, because Dave really came in and did such genius work here on that moment for Joy and how she got back. So I just think you should take it, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, it's this is probably the hardest moment in the movie to write, and I think that can apply to any script. Is sort of where you have to come to terms with the mistake that your character made early in the film, and there's sort of two things that hit you immediately when you're writing these moments. One is what's happening externally, right? What's the low point of this character externally, meaning they can't get back home, right? The tube falls. It's easier, I think, from the beginning of the movie to conceive how to make that moment difficult, right? Because it's physical. There's no way to get back home. I don't know how we're going to solve this problem. But the harder, more difficult, I think, answer or question is sort of what is your character learning in this moment? And what is the epiphany that comes out of it? And what is the internal story you're telling? What is the internal low point? And the first movie, was about Joy sort of discovering the value of sadness. And what I felt coming into this film was that it was a story about Joy discovering the value of joy. And that her low point in this film truly felt like feeling that as we get older, maybe she has no purpose, and that she really is. It's again, it's about her. It's always about your main character and the worst thing they can possibly feel, which is that they're useless. And coming out of that moment and realizing that she's actually more important than ever, felt like the most emotional way to come out of a low point. You're always going to find, wow, I hope, fun ways to get her back to headquarters, and we tried lots of ways that worked with that. And there's dynamite and there's all this fun, but really at the end of the day, it's not a successful moment if it's not paired with what does your main character learn? How do they change? How did this move? What was the purpose of this film? And it all boils down to joy.
Lynsey, what did you particularly find interesting about Joy's character arc? And did you have any questions you wanted to ask Meg and Dave about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, like there's such a great full circle moment, a brilliant payoff, between those two scenes, which I love in terms of obviously, in terms of the film and the arc. But for me, actually, the thing that stood out, particularly when rewatching the film and reading the script, I think was just how, that's something I feel like I can struggle with, and I'm sure a lot of other people watching are as well, is describing, putting in just too much exposition, too much of everything. What I absolutely loved about, especially the first scene, is I'm talking about that tube. I think it was like 4 words. I think it was just like jerry-rigged, wonky tube, and you just think it says everything. Like, that this isn't going to end well. That it's just, it's such a brilliant setup. That something's going to go wrong with that thing. But it explains so much about, like you say, Joy. We know she's already about to make mistakes. She's already doing it before anything else is happening. And then
what's interesting about the reason it's jerry-rigged is because it was really important to Kelsey and I that you get a sense that Joy built it.
Yeah.
Like, this is not the mind. She's not just responding to some brain development. Yeah. She's doing what we do as parents and going, I'm just going to build this thing and it's going to make you so much better. And it's her fault. Like, she built it, or she got somebody to build it for her. So that's why it's important that it's jerry-rigged. She rigged it up. She got mind workers and she did it. So it's very character detail in a way.
And your main character made the wrong choice. Like every plot point, and Meg is very big on this, and I love that, right? Which is that every major plot moment, you can read all the books, right? But all those moments, inciting incident, low point, all that stuff has to be caused by your main character, and that's such a great example is Joy's. It speaks to Joy's character flaw, her and there's so many instances in this film where a bad choice that Joy makes gets you to the next part of the movie.
And here's the trick, but this is the special sauce that you have to figure out. You have to get the audience to agree with the bad choice.
Mhm.
You have to brainwash them so they're like, gosh, Joy, you're so smart, that they agree with what the emotion. There's a reason the emotions are like, what would we do without you, Joy? You're so smart. You're trying to tell the audience, let's agree with Joy. Because if they're already like, Joy, that is a terrible idea. Why are you making all those choices? I'm not saying they're not characters like that, but generally in a transformative character, you want the audience to be brainwashed into all those bad choices so that they have a catharsis and look back and are like, oh,
Yeah.
I did this.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it works so well. It's just such a brilliant, like, you, as I say, you know that everything's going to go wrong at the back of your mind, but at the same time, like you say, you're on board and you accept everything and you completely understand why Joy's doing it all. So it's just fantastic. But on that same note as well, like I say, those just so a few words say so much. I think a point that Luke and I were chatting about just before we came on actually was, I was surprised at the length of the script, given that the film is almost half that, right? So again, whether this is animation or what, I mean, you talk about 160 pages for a 90-page film, but it doesn't feel, there's obviously not huge dialogue points, there's not monologues or anything. It feels just really quick, but also really, really easy to read and really pacey. And obviously the film is the same. I mean, is that something, did you ever have kind of a page limit that you were thinking about? Did you know, I suppose, again, is this just something in terms of
Page count is very different in these situations because oftentimes we're working in sequences and we're writing 5 pages at a time without looking at a final page count number. We're because of, and again, this doesn't really apply to anyone out there writing an animation script, right? I think those should probably stick to the 120 rule, right? But when you're in
95 animation, 95,
95, sorry, 95.
95.
Shorter the better. But when you're in edit, right, you're a lot of times these scripts just become conforming what's in front of you on screen. And so a lot of times to get to this point, you have to write a great script with lots of flowery images and, and great descriptions. But once you're in it, you're just like, they make a left, they make a right, let's go, and then on screen, you're sort of finding details, but not really putting them in the script as much anymore.
And that even goes for dialogue. Sometimes in this dialogue that you've given the storyboard artist, you have intentionally made it more because when the images come in, they can start. I'm going in and out. They'll take it up with the images, but they need to know what to draw by the dialogue. So it's a very different process.
Yeah.
I see we still got a lot of comments and questions coming in on the chat. So I was wondering if Diogo can come up and just ask a couple of the questions that people have been asking.
Yeah, sure. The questions keep on coming and some are really interesting. So the next one I have separated here is from Dazzle. They ask, how do you work out balance what's suitable for children and keep them interested, but also parents and adults around them to keep them entertained, so they put it on for the children in your writing?
I know Dave has a great answer. I'm just going to quick say the version of working at Pixar or Disney Animation, and then Dave, I love your answer to this question. So when you're working at Pixar or Animation, no one ever talks about children. Like, it's not a conversation. This is not a children's movie. This is a movie. And we're all trying to make ourselves laugh. We're all trying to dig into our own human condition, what it feels like to be 12 years old, what it feels like, or 13, what it feels like to be a parent, those are the discussions you're having. You're never thinking of this as a children's film in terms of that's how you're constructing it or thinking about it. You're thinking of it as a film. So Dave, and I also love what Dave has to say.
I think what Meg thinks I'm going to say is the following, and I really enjoy saying this about family films because I think this is why they're so great to write, is that as someone who's a dad, you end up watching these movies over and over and over again, and you you end up watching them over the course of your life. You watch them with your kid watches them when they're a kid, when they're a teenager, when they're a parent, and it's a different movie every time, and so what you're writing is something to knowing that the same viewer is going to watch this at different ages. And so you're writing something that can be enjoyed and rewatched and re-seen for all ages, so that the movie grows with you, and I think that's why it's okay in these movies to not just write something that's for children. It's why it's okay to write things that are for adults. Why the movie is 70% Looney Tunes gags, that my 7-year-old will enjoy. And then there's really crushing emotional catharsis at the end of it that an adult can appreciate. I think that's the beauty of making these movies, is that you're not just making one movie, you're kind of writing a couple within it. And how you sort of sew the lining of this thing is just as important as what the pattern is on the outside of it.
And was there one other question, Diogo, that you would like to put?
Yes, there's another one from Jolene, and they ask, they say, anxiety is often a villain, but you portrayed her as a misguided protector. How did you ensure she stayed relatable rather than a traditional antagonist?
I'll say from where it started, and then Dave can jump in if that's okay, Dave. So in early drafts, when she was truly more monstrous, but always we had some empathy for her, because we know from research and from our own lives that anxiety, no emotion inside of you is bad. Even envy is there to tell you what you want. It's very important. Everything is there to help you, other than shame. So we knew that she always wanted what she thought was best for Riley. So she's a character who has a great goal and a terrible plan to get there, which I love those characters. So she always was somebody who wanted what was best for Riley from the very conception. She would, in certain drafts, really tip more bad. She was monstrous, and she was a monster, and her eyes would roll in her head. And then when Shame came in, she really was bad. I loved it, but it just didn't feel Pixarian, and it started to take on a very heavy feeling inside the film and suck some of the fun out. And so Kelsey was like, I don't want to do that. And she was stealing from anxiety, but always it's the compassionate, even for yourself, when you're having anxiety, ask her, what do you want to tell me? She's there trying to help you. You may not need it, and you can ask her to please go sit in a chair. That's not happening. But it's kind of having compassion for all parts of yourself is how we got there.
I remember thinking about her introduction and how we wanted to avoid some of the traps of just making her a pure antagonist, right? And making her sort of the super fan was a template that Pete had suggested. And I sort of went home one day and was like, I kind of think she's Christopher Nolan's assistant. And what happens is this assistant shows up on day one of Interstellar, and she looks around the set and she's like, I don't want to say anything, but and I'm a huge fan of Christopher Nolan, but as she's sort of fangirling out about being Christopher Nolan's assistant, she kind of realizes at some point, I think I could direct this movie better than Christopher Nolan, and I don't want to say anything, but at some point, I think I have to step in and kick Christopher Nolan out of this movie and to start directing it myself. And, all of the things that can happen when you try to do that, all the things that can go wrong are what go wrong for anxiety. You maybe were not prepared to direct a $200 million movie, even though you thought you were. And it's funny, but it was a weird way to sort of trick me into writing a character who meant well, who came on in a way that was, you're so charmed by, she really loved Joy. To start with someone who was really, really infatuated with Joy, and then watch that sort of glow go away as she watches Joy work. And she's like, I'm a huge fan, but now that we're working together, I actually see I have major issues with your process. There was sort of something I really enjoyed about following that track to its conclusion, because it was both an antagonist, but someone who meant well, but also it had some comedy baked into it. And
her reasoning is sound, which is, this is adolescence. We're more evolved emotions. It's always in her mind. She is more evolved. So, and she first wants to work with Joy because she's such a fan, but then eventually she's like, oh, you're just not needed. I'm more evolved. This is adolescence. So sorry, but I'm the evolved emotion.
Yeah.
I'm what's needed. But she has a very valid argument. I'm what's needed now. That's why I got called up here.
Awesome.
So thank you so much, Diogo. Thank you. I hope we can bring you back for some final couple of questions in shortly. But we did sort of hop forward a little bit, and obviously we were looking at Joy's character journey there. But I just want to sort of wind back a little bit because we were talking there about the conflict between anxiety and joy, and I think it'd be nice to have a look at this sort of scene in Imagination Land, actually, where we see that sort of conflict between them is a little more pronounced. So yeah, perhaps we could have a look at that now if we can.
We need to help Riley prepare. Now is the time to send up every possible thing that could go wrong. We are looking to the future.
This is after anxiety has taken over headquarters and cast out joy, anger, fear, disgust, and sadness. Trying to retrieve Riley's sense of self, which anxiety has banished to the back of her mind, the emotions enter Imagination Land. They find out anxiety is keeping Riley awake at night, worrying about a tryout for the high school team. Anxiety is using Riley's imagination against her by sending her projections about every possible thing that could go wrong. But Joy turns the tables by sending Riley positive projections instead.
To match her jersey, everybody copies her, and she is so cool.
Riley wears knee pads.
We buy flowers for the losing team. What? I can't always be the rage guy.
No.
Have we lost him?
Oh, we might have.
Well, I can ask some questions if you guys.
I can tell you where it came from.
There you
I
go.
didn't realise I had disappeared there. I saw someone had disappeared. I didn't realise it was me who was the one who actually done it. I thought it was Diogo. I was just saying, when no one could hear me, apart from Louise, who's next door. I really like how this scene plays on the idea of anxious thoughts kind of keeping us awake at night. I think it works really beautifully in this. I mean, Dave, I think you were saying, maybe towards the beginning there that the Pixar screenplays do go through sort of multiple iterations, and you have sort of test screenings in front of a brain trust. You then provide feedback, and then you do more iterations. So did this particular scene, did this evolve as it went through that process? And were there different versions of this scene, or even different scenes entirely that took place at this point in the story?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at the chat really briefly. Someone's asking, is this the Pixar office? And they are absolutely correct. That is entirely the Pixar office. It went through, I think, a couple of different tonal shifts because it was kind of sort of felt like the Apple 1984 commercial at some point,
That's where it came from.
Right, isn't that where it came from? Because I know that Meg was there.
And
for
I was
the
like,
early
remember that commercial?
I think it's actually very similar to what was probably originally in there. I know we adjusted some jokes, and we certainly changed some things with the end of it and the Fort Pillowton of it all, but it's always been some form of that, I think, right, Meg?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the earliest scenes that came, and in a rare experience stayed. Usually they'd go back out, and we went to Facts and Emotions, and where those were made. We went to with Idea Fisherman. We went to a lot of places. We went to Procrastination Land. We went to a lot of places that did not make it into the film because it didn't service Riley, joy, and anxiety. We're playing 3-dimensional chess, so anything that goes in has to service all three of those storylines. But one of the earliest things Kelsey and I talked about is laying in bed at night feeling anxious, and what's happening there. Why is she driving so hard? And where the hell is joy during that? Where is my sense of self-compassion or love of myself or any happiness? Because joy and anxiety, it's very hard for them to coexist at the same time in your body, which is also why anxiety wants her out. So this one is one that stayed, and we had so much fun. And I'm sure, Dave, you joined the fun of what things we think of at night. And the storyboard artist just went crazy with that. And it was so fun. But it's all coming from a vulnerable conversation, admitting that this is what happens. And I think people who are writers or artists have very vivid imaginations. And it's always been amazing to me how we can use that against ourselves. And that if you're not doing your craft, that imagination has to go somewhere. It's like a tap in your head, and it will start to attack you because you're not writing. So it was something that I felt strongly about, that if you've got to use your imagination towards what you want and what you want to create in the world, because otherwise it will attack you. So it made perfect sense to me that Joy would go into imagination land and find out, of course, anxiety is using all of this tapped imagination inside of Riley against her because it's power.
Yeah.
Your imagination is power, and that Joy's got to actively now fight her, which is another important part of the plot. Like, Joy's not just like, this is bad. Joy's got to be like, what are we doing to fight this?
That was always the one sentence underneath this scene for me, was that anxiety is using Riley's imagination against her. And I was like, what a great reason to go back to imagination land, you know, in this movie, not just for the fun of it, but like, because it matters.
Yeah.
And Lynsey, I mean, what did you find particularly interesting about this scene? And did you have any questions about it you'd like to ask Dave and Meg?
I mean, I think they've actually answered quite a few. I was very interested in this idea, you know, that is like you said, that kind of that we use it, that anxiety is using something that's already there. And I love that this is, you know, they're still following the same rules. I love the kind of, you know, of the first movie, projecting our dreams up and things like that. But for me, it did still slightly, I mean, you guys talking about anxiety's character and that, you know, that we don't want to dislike them. And I think some people have touched on this slightly in the chat, but for me, this scene also did feel quite premeditated. It feels like, is this something that anxiety's just come up with? It actually feels more to me like, you know, this kind of secret, massive den in imagination land with all these workers, something that she's kind of been working and building towards even before before she's even got here. It feels like something that's quite premeditated. So I
think that speaks to the layering that, you know, for writers to remember, there's a reason you're writing drafts and drafts and drafts and drafts, because suddenly these layering start to happen. So anxiety used to have a layer. She used to have a layer with all of her plans and all the string and all that stuff that you've seen in movies, and they discover her lair, right? We didn't need that. And it made her too crazy and bad. But that idea is now in the movie, in its DNA, that she has been planning. We're not going to go there, but it even almost unconsciously as a writer is now in you, and it's starting to allow you to create things that seem crazy that she put this up so long. But of course she did, because there is some part of her that has been planning this, and I know that because I saw her lair. So again, I'm just trying to always emphasize, you have to write that many drafts. You have to, or you're never going to get there.
Yeah, it's brilliant. But that's what I mean. Yeah, you can really feel it. You feel that there's something that's, you know, we haven't known, and now, but we didn't need to know all that other stuff, but we get this now. And I think that really, like, I love that part, that for me, that feeling of this scene, that there's been all this work done behind it before we even get there. And
she used to have like a henchman, a mind worker who would run up and do things for her. There was so much, people. There was so much.
Oh, no, it's fantastic.
So I just wanted to bring up the script pages, actually, because I did particularly want to have a look at a scene at the very, very end of the film. So I'm just going to bring up my pages. And this is obviously just the scene that we were just looking at here in Fort Pillow Town. But I wanted to have a look at a scene towards the end of the script, if I can just quickly scroll through all this, which is really in the climax of the film, when we by that stage, Riley is now having the tryout for the high school team, and but it all kind of sort of starts to go a bit wrong, because she accidentally kind of clashes into kind of Grace, and Grace gets kind of hurt, and in a very nice kind of callback to the beginning, really, great Joy that Riley then gets kind of put into the penalty box, which is, it's just sort of from here, really. So we see here that Riley sort of now has this new sense of self because of anxiety's actions, and thinks she's not good enough, and then she accidentally she's so desperate to kind of do well that she crashes into Grace and gets sent to the penalty box, and then she, because anxiety is then sort of putting so much sort of pressure on her, we then see that Riley starts basically having like an anxiety attack, and meanwhile by this point, Joy and the other emotions, they've made it back to headquarters here, and then they try and put the old sense of self back, but can't, and then Joy has to sort of go inside this kind of vortex that anxiety has created. And as you see on this page here, this is from page 146 on the script. Joy then has to try and get anxiety to let Riley go by saying her that, you don't get to choose who Riley is. And I think it's, probably one of the best depictions of an anxiety attack I think I've ever seen on screen, I think. And but it's all very it's very compelling to watch, but it's also very sensitively kind of handled, I thought. And I wanted to ask Dave, how did you sort of come to constructing this scene, but also how did you make sure that you got the tone right, so that for a family film it didn't feel either too kind of heavy going, but it also didn't feel like it was sort of making light of what can be quite a distressing experience for people?
I think this scene is a great example of a successful handoff from writer to animator, because all I can do in this part of the movie, as we were trying to at a late stage come up with what is the best climax, what is the best payoff to the premise of this thing, and of course, an anxiety attack feels right. But it's also my job to sort of say, well, forgetting that it's a kid's movie, if we just want to treat this emotionally, truthfully, we need to set up the movie in such a way that by this point in the film, Riley is in a situation where she has no cell phone. She can't call her parents. She has nothing that can help her. And what would happen to somebody when they feel that they have failed and are spiraling, and just honestly, just treat it as a breakdown. And where the handoff I think gets so brilliant in the hands of Pixar is that it becomes, well, okay, inside the mind, right? How do you show that tempest, and how do you show anxiety going out of control, And so to me, it just becomes this, there's two successful things here. One is Pixar allowing the writer to say, what's the most emotional thing that could happen at this point in the film? And then two, allowing the animation to cover tone, right? All I can say is emotionally what I think should happen, and then tonally they find a way to execute it that's palatable.
And Lynsey, what did you find particularly interesting about this scene, or what worked very well for you? And did you have any questions for Dave about it?
I mean, I love, again, like as you said, how it's all depicted, but I also love how, externally as well, it's written in terms of, the friends noticing and things like that. I think it's just a lovely moment. Again, it is obviously so much about the emotions and that whole, as you say, tempest, but the whole storm inside the head of anxiety and everything is so important. But I also love that we see Grace looking at her, and we know that, that these characters, these kind of the reasons externally for her, I suppose, and obviously we're talking about puberty and everything else, but, this kind of kickoff of her being scared that she's losing her friends, and then it's her friends that are the ones that are noticing her, I think is such a lovely.
And if you watch the animation there, the what's great about animation is that every move has to be intentional, right? I mean, everything from there's moments where she touches something to ground herself, which is such a part of an anxiety attack. But these little things have to be thought of and have to be executed by groups of people. It's not just a great actress deciding that's what I would do in that moment. It's a bunch of people choosing with intent to ground that on the real life side of the storytelling.
Yeah. And this scene is also a really, I'm beating this drum today. Maybe it's because I'm writing my own script, but in terms of iteration, you have an anxiety hijacked, it's going to end in an anxiety attack, right? Mm-hmm. But what that is, and more importantly, where joy is the A-line. Joy is the A-line. So we went through so many. Headquarters fell down. There was a storm. So just in Joy's world, what that looked like went through, I can't even tell you how many. And every time we got notes, they were like, go back to the third act. And I was like, ah. So it's iteration. And what is happening to Riley, which I'd love Dave to speak to, which is, so I got the note that in the first movie, Riley's on a bus running away. It feels physically dangerous.
Yeah.
So it creates tension in that third act. And they felt that they wanted that in the movie. And so they told me to go back, do the third act so that Riley is in physical danger. And I was like, she's at hockey camp? Like, how am I going to do that? But that's the note. And that is part of my job, is to try it. So we did things like, there's the lure of the jersey of the most famous player to ever come out of here, and it's in the rafters of the gym, and it's always a lure of whoever gets the jersey down is the ultimate, and she's trying to prove something, Valentina, so she's way up in the rafters, and then they're like, the rafters, that's insane, she could die. What if it's just in a tree? Like, it was crazy that we were trying to answer this note, right? Because that's my job in the thing is there a version that she's physically in danger? And then Dave arrived, which I think was the universe, the story universe is like.
I think that sometimes you have to look for that note behind the note, right? And they had asked for physical peril, and physical peril, it was not right, but it was pointing at the desire for life and death stakes, right? And I think what we had to understand at some point at this part of the film was that life and death stakes can feel like life or death stakes to a teenager without having to be dangled from a tree limb. You know, I think that there's a real sense that to Riley, this 3-day hockey camp is going to affect the rest of her life, and that the stakes of this game are life and death to her. And so if you strip out all the physical danger and just put her in a box, literally box her into a penalty box, and it forces you to focus on the life or death stakes coming from the character's point of view.
And to the writers out there who are writing and making a living, sometimes you do have to move on. Like, I had to go on to this other project, and I felt a little bit heartbroken because I didn't figure out that third act, and I couldn't, and I think that you have to believe that the story universe, the story gods have their reasoning, and that Dave came in with his point of view, his freshness, his ability to talk to people, and his talent, and that's what the story needed. And these stories are bigger than you sometimes. They are much larger than you and your ego, and you're the writer. And you have to go with that. The world wanted this story, and it needed this story to be. And that's why I was so proud, and so proud isn't the right word, so honored, for Dave to come in and do his incredible work. So I just say that to the writers out there who are, when you feel bad, maybe you've been replaced, or maybe you had to leave or whatever, just, it's part of the process in a larger way, in my opinion.
And I'll just say, look, from my perspective too, I was honored to be able to step into at that moment, but also we wouldn't have gotten there without the collaboration of everybody in that room. I mean, so much of my ideas only got so far, and then the animators came in, and suddenly there was a cyclone in front of us, and that was a piece I couldn't conceive of. But once it's in front of you, everyone starts to jump in and say, "Oh, this is all coming together visually. It's all making sense." And so much of writing, even at the earliest stages, is about asking for help, and about collaboration in some form. Because it's hard to say, having gone through so many different full processes in TV and theater and musicals and film, like, it's very rarely one person who comes in and says, "I know what's going on here." It's so much of it is about finding a bunch of people who will tell who you trust to tell the right story, and then finding it together. And I think that's writing is by definition such a lonely endeavor. So it tricks you into thinking it has to be, and there are so many different ways of collaborating that are things other than two people sit at a laptop and write a scene together. I mean, there's plenty of ways to collaborate and to get feedback and ideas, and have someone who's not a writer read something and give you feedback. There's so many different ways to get inspired. That I think this scene's a great example of that, because it really was a bunch of people all doing their best, getting inspired, and then clicking into it.
I love that.
So I was wondering if we can just get Diogo to come up and just see if there's a final couple of questions that we can put to Dave and Meg from the audience.
Yes, yes. Well, the audience is just loving all this entire discussion, and I think just because we were talking about that very impressive scene, there's a question that talks about those visual metaphors from Bianca. She asks, "How did you approach designing the visual metaphors, and what kind of collaboration went into making them both visually striking and emotionally resonant? Did a metaphor evolve unexpectedly?" Well, I think a lot of that question was already answered, but if you have something else to add on a different
I would
scene
just
or
add
anything
that
else.
it's back to the same thing. Like there was a storm in this movie
Mhm.
version, I don't even know what. Then it was a swirling storm, but it was outside of headquarters, and joy and the emotions were caught in it, and they were swirling around as headquarters was rocking. And I'm not saying that the amazing person who, like Dave said, came up with that. I think it all goes in there, right? And it left, but it's still in there. So, and again, what Dave said, it's this incredible collaboration.
Great. And is there like maybe one last question that we can just put to Meg and
Yeah.
Dave before we let them go?
Yeah, the last one I chose from Jen, and it's a little bit more about the script itself, the script and the structure of the script. She notices that the script had no cuts between some characters' dialogue, and that you had the dialogue sometimes interlocked together side by side. How were you able to intercut between the different voices? And it's all so fast, and a lot of things happen at the same time. So I think this is more or less what she wants to know.
Does she mean like dual dialogue, do you think?
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
It means dual
Mhm.
dialogue.
I think in particular, there were quite a few. There were some moments where you would have like Riley on the left in the real world, and then something in headquarters with Joy, sort of, or the emotions talking on the right hand side. I think she was talking about that.
That might be more from the point of view of the animators, because I don't know about you, Dave. Maybe you did that. I didn't do that. I would do intercut with, and I would just put it like this. So I don't know, Dave, did you do that?
Yeah, I think maybe the editor or the animator sort of is responsible for the best answer to this question. I know that. Yeah, I might just leave it there. I'm not really sure. Yeah, what else I can throw there?
I just had one quick final question myself, actually. If I could ask this, I just would be very keen to know, firstly, from yourself, Meg, was there anything? I mean, obviously, you've written quite a few scripts for Pixar now, but was there anything particular from working on this script that you might look to apply to your own work? I mean, you said you're writing a script of your own there, so was there anything from this experience that you're now applying?
Well, I think the biggest change, and it's why I originally left to go do something, is I now have a writing partner, because I found the collaborative process of either working with the director, the storyboard artist, the head of story, the editor. Suddenly I'm by myself again as a feature writer, and I was like, yeah, no, I gotta bounce. I gotta bounce and bounce and bounce and bring something in. So I now have a writing partner, Joe Forte, and it's really helped me push faster. It sometimes feels slower because you got to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, but you're going quicker underneath to get to something deeper and faster. So that's the biggest thing I've brought away is I love that collaborative process of being pushed. I mean, I don't like it in the moment, of course, I don't. But I know in hindsight that this is what's necessary, and to ask me the hardest questions and why are you doing that? And let's try this. And how about that? So that's the biggest thing I took away. And just, I did tend with shame to make her too archetypically bad, and really having to use the all of my muscles to keep anxiety human, just to say the wrong, she's not human, but she is, and having all of her reasons, and to really be able to keep track of that and create conflict was it was a push for me. Well, listen, it's 3-dimensional chess. Okay. So there's so much that you take from it in terms of how every scene that's in there is in there for a reason.
Great. And Dave, just quickly, was there anything, you particularly might have taken from this, working on this script, you would maybe apply to a future project?
Yeah, I mean, the process, here is it's on such a big scale. I mean, you're making these billion-dollar movies for big studios, and you get a lot of notes. There's a lot of feedback. There's a lot of iterating. There's just a lot of a lot. And I think what it helps is when you go back to, say, writing a TV show for Stars, which is one of my next projects. You're in the writer's room, and you're not getting that same pressure. You're not getting that same amount of things. It helps you, I think, look at things in perspective a little bit. And for me, it was just about not getting too down about notes and feedback and changes, and because you're doing so much of it, you're iterating so much, you're throwing out whole storylines and then rewriting them the next day. You're just put through this sort of these sort of writer Olympics up at Pixar, and once you've done that, everything seems very manageable and doable on some level. So I can thank them for that, for sure.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much to both of you for joining us. So firstly, Meg, thank you so much for
Thank you so much for having us. It was fun.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And Dave, thank you so much as well.
Of course.
Thank you. So we will let you two go. So thank you so much for being part of this today.
All right.
Bye,
Take care,
guys.
guys.
Thank you.
And yes, thank you, Lynsey, as well for coming on and taking part. Just before we let you go, was there anything, obviously we're asking Dave and Meg there, if there was anything particularly, that they took from writing the script that then applied to their own work? Was there anything from either, from reading the script or even just from this discussion today that you might look to apply to your own work? Because you said you were working on an animated feature yourself.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the script, as I mentioned before, I think I was amazed at how long it was but it just doesn't feel that at all packed into obviously that 90 minutes. So I think not that I'm going to write 160-minute screenplay at any moment it seems, but I think the script has certainly taught me how to be economical in a way. It feels like they're just saying everything that needs to be said. It moves really, really fast. The descriptions is no more than you need. I think it's done so well. So hopefully I'll be able to take some of that going forward in my own animation. But I say I haven't yet worked with an animator, so it's really interesting listening to them, how that obviously Pixar is a beast and is something else entirely. But it's really interesting listening to how working with animators has affected the script as it was going along. So yeah, something that I'm looking forward to in future, even if on I'm sure a much smaller scale.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking part and being our guest panelist today.
No, thanks so much for having me. It's been really fun.
Thank you. And thank you so much to Diogo as well for coming up and asking the questions from the audience. And thank you so much to everyone who contributed to a very, very lively chat and also asked questions from Meg and Dave. Thank you to Luis, who's producing. Thank you also to Joanne, who put together the fantastic clips we were showing. And I say thanks everyone so much for attending and taking part. I hope you will join us for another script club in the future. Until then, thank you very much and good night.